It says in verse 3 of chapter 2, "By this we know that we have come to know Him, if we keep His commandments." As a friend of mine says, brothers, to understand that, my goodness, it's not rocket surgery, he says. To understand that, listen to what he says. By this we know that we have come to know Him if we keep His commandments. And possibly you're out there right now saying, then I am doomed. Because I look at His commandments, I fall short of them. Again, understand what John is speaking of. He's speaking of a style of life. And it's within the context of what we know about sanctification. You see, the unbelieving man, though he be in the church, soundly resting in Zion, the unbelieving man cares not to know the will of God through the commandments. He does not want to hear them. He is ignorant of them in many ways, and even the commandments he knows, when he breaks them, he cares not. He's not afflicted in his conscience. He just goes on. He lives as one without law. And Jesus says in Matthew 7, thus he shall be condemned. But the true believer begins to grow and delight in God's commandments. Delight in the wisdom and the precepts that are found in His law throughout the full body of Scripture, and gradually begins to grow in that delight and seeks to be conformed to those commandments. And throughout his life, you see an increasing deliverance of this person over to greater and greater obedience. You see just a simple change in direction in the believer's life. Where the unbeliever cared not for the commandments of God, the believer begins to grow in his affections for the commandments of God. Where the unbeliever cared not whether he was conformed or not, the believer, he mourns at his lack of conformity and presses on to greater conformity. He's inclined toward these commandments. It's amazing to me today. I honestly, I just don't understand the aversion of the evangelical community to God's law. I can't understand it. As a matter of fact, I can't even understand the unbelievers' hatred of God's law. Let me give you an example. I was teaching again in Europe at this university, and someone made the mention that the law of God, it just binds us and does all these things, and they just did not like the law of God. So I asked the question to the students. I said, let me ask you a question. Just what part of God's law is it that you hate? Is it the part about you shall not lie? Is it the part that says don't steal another man's wife and destroy his family? Is it the part about not coveting so that there's no wars and murder among you? Just tell me what part of this law is so ugly to you. And if such things as I have just spoken are so ugly to you, what does that say about you? What kind of evil, vile, radically depraved creature are you that you would hate commandments that tells you to respect other people, not to lie to them, not to kill them, not to steal their wives? I don't understand. But it's the same way with the evangelical community. I began to talk about the law of God as a delight in my heart, and they're calling me a legalist. I said, what about this don't you love? What about the book of Proverbs it makes you hate? And what is it in all this stuff? I just find it as beautiful. Do you find the law of God, His commandments, His wisdom? Do you go into the book of Proverbs and find something? Maybe you've read the book 100 times, but all of a sudden you find something you've never seen before and you just get so excited. You're delighted in it. That's a mark of Christianity. But the type of Christianity that hates the law of God and hates the wisdom of God and looks for every possible loophole in the law of God in order to fill their Christianity with their fallen culture, if you're that type of person, be afraid that on the day of judgment you will stand naked before God and your entire life will be exposed and your soul will be cast into hell. because you were found to be one who claimed to be a disciple and yet lived as though God had never given a law to be obeyed.